respectful dignitaries, KOFOD executives, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege and honor to present in this August gathering carried out for the ratification of Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability and Optional Protocol and the status of individual communication and inquiry in the Nepalese practice. Before I start the overview of the strategic intervention carried out to push for the ratification of Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, I would like to emphasize here that at present, the human rights of persons with disability has globally been recognized. They are not entitled only for charity, since they are contributing for national and global prosperity. So, today is not the time to keep them away, but engage them in the nation-building venture. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability and its optional protocol was adopted by the United Nations 61st General Assembly on 13th December 2006 and was opened for ratification on 30th March 2007. Both the Convention and its optional protocol came into force on 3rd May 2008. Until that date, the Convention has been signed by 164 countries and ratified by 181. Likewise, 94 countries signed the optional protocol and 96 ratified it. Nepal is one of those countries that has ratified both the Convention and the optional protocol. It is notable that the Legislative Parliament unanimously ratified both the Convention and the optional protocol on 27th December 2009 without any reservation. There was a comprehensive campaign launched under my leadership. This presentation embraced the successful advocacy campaign, challenges and mitigation measures undertaken for facilitating the process of ratification of both the Convention and the optional protocol from Nepal and the status of individual communication and inquiry. In the past years, Nepal as a country has itself witnessed of several changes, particularly the governance structure of the country. The People's Movement in 2006, leading to the said overall, not only dismissed the monarchical system of rule, but also introduced the ideology of inclusive society and political representation of marginalized community on the basic principles of equality and non-discrimination. The subsequent election of the Constitutional Assembly was considered to be the first step in guaranteeing inclusiveness and establishing rule of law, while disability is an issue remained to be addressed, in particular through the above mechanisms. Efforts towards ratification of the Convention and the optional protocol became more challenging. In the course of comprehensive campaign of pushing for the ratification of the Convention and the optional protocol, another challenge appeared by the disagreement of deaf community, whereas the Article 24 of the Convention, particularly the provision of inclusive education and individual communication and inquiry, was offended by the deaf group. This disagreement led the situation that the chairperson of the parliament was put in dilemma. In order to resolve the problems, I carried out the following strategies. The comprehensive launching campaign of the ratification was demanded to inspire for establishing the witness in initiatives undertaken the first Council of the Ministers formed after the reinstatement of democracy. As a leader of the Nepali disability movement, I undertook some important steps to push for the ratification of the Convention and the optional protocol, embracing effort of ratification of Convention and the optional protocol. In my leadership, the National Federation of the Disabled Nepal had initiated the discourse in raising wider awareness regarding the importance and the relevance. In the course of building awareness amongst rights holders and the duty bearers, we collaborated with the National Human Rights Commission for the translation of Convention and the optional protocol in Nepali language. This was the permanent effort to create wider acceptance among Nepali-speaking parliamentarians on the contents of Convention and the optional protocol. As a result of various advocacy meetings with the government entities to sensitize for the signing and ratification of both the Convention and the optional protocol, the government signed both the CRPD and optional protocol on 3rd January 2008. We continued and focused advocacy with concerned ministries and the government agencies, it gave effect in the adoption of a decision by the Cabinet Ministry headed by Honorable Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal to put forward the agenda of ratification in the Legislative Parliament in December 2008 with cited hopes of the ratification of both Convention and the Optional Protocol at the earliest. Most of the parliamentarians representing marginalized community were not found aware about the formal ratification process of the Convention and the Optional Protocol. Thus, the initiatives to build the capacity of the parliamentarians was taken by the development of the ratification toolkits. It was strongly realized that the ratification toolkits in local language was essential for facilitating the member of parliament and the political parties, which played vital role to push for the CRPD and Optional Protocol ratification. When the People's Movement in 2006 reinstated democracy in Nepal, the active roles played by persons with disability was highly acknowledged by the political parties. The interim constitution couldn't address the representation of persons with disability in the Constitutional Assembly, though. Gradually, the issue of persons with disabilities was overlooked, and the parliamentarians representing political parties failed to raise the issue of marginalization, inclusion, access to justice, and mainstreaming persons with disabilities. Realizing the fact that the absence of representation of persons with disabilities may restore the disability issue low profile within parliamentarian process and the entire constitutional drafting exercise. There was high risk of an optional protocol CRPD ratification agenda kept in shadow. Thus, I decided to convene indefinite hunger strike with a demand that the representation of persons with disability is guaranteed in the Constitutional Assembly, working as a member of Legislative Parliament. It was April 2008 when I led the hunger strike comprising 5 members in the team. The media massively covered the news in print and electronic means, building awareness among political parties, government, human rights workers, and general public. As a result, the president of the recent largest political party, Mr. Pushpakamal Dahal, expressed commitment to nominate a person with disability in the parliament, urging to break our hunger strike. Consequently, Mrs. Indramaya Gurung, a wheelchair user woman with disability, was assigned as a parliamentarian in the seats to be nominated by the cabinet ministry. With this endeavor, the political parties were forced to raise the issue of ratification of convention and the optional protocol in the parliament. The disability rights movement gained tremendous height and privileged to review the draft of the thematic committee of Constitutional Assembly and recommendation for the provision of disability rights within the fundamental rights provision, which is the landmark achievement of the present Constitution of Nepal. Following the formation of elected government, it was remarkable that the submission of the agenda of ratification by the Cabinet Ministry in the Parliament was commendable. Since the Constitutional Assembly was going to finalize the draft of the Constitution, which demanded the intervention from DPOs to ensure the disability rights provisions. At the same time, the agenda of ratification of the Convention and the Optional Protocol was going parallelly. While the DPOs collectively urged the government to submit the agenda of ratification of Convention and the Optional Protocol so that the current session of the Parliament come up with positive decision, but the process encountered grave challenge by the negative intervention of a deaf Parliament going against the Article 24 of CRPD and Optional Protocol, which demanded our supplementary tasks for strengthening the advocacy for ratification. The deaf community raised the concern of development of segregated approach in the education of persons with hearing disability in Nepal, which is contrast to the Article 24 of CRPD. Their claim was that the sign language is not used everywhere, especially so in remote areas, are resulting in serious problem for the communication of person with hearing impairment at every stage. At the same time, upon ratification of optional protocol, the other persons with disability will have rights to individual communication and inquiry that may challenge the existing practice of a special educational structure in Nepal. It was realized essential to persuade the persons with hearing disabilities who face challenges in daily life and execution of the activities that were entirely different from those other forms of persons with disabilities due to communication barriers. In this instant, a committee was formed to coordinate with relevant stakeholders and facilitate the deaf community to agree for the ratification of convention and the optional protocol without any reservation. The CRPD Coordination Committee, led by myself, facilitated the process, convened the series of meetings with parliamentarians, deaf group, and came into the consent that the existing practice of special education will not be impacted even after ratification of the convention and optional protocol, which allows the implementation of Article 24 of CRPD in Nepal. It was the multiple responsibility of 601 parliamentarians to draft the Constitution of Nepal and also ratify the convention and the optional protocol. Thus, the concept of establishing Inter-Parliamentarian Disability Caucus was emerged, which was conceptualized by myself. 16 Constitutional Assembly members from major political parties made caucus in 2009 and made functional as disability rights ambassadors to push for the ratification of the convention and the optional protocol and ensure disability-friendly provisions in the Constitution. In the active engagement of the members of Inter-Parliamentarian Disability-Friendly Caucus, all the parliamentarians were informed about the contents of CRPD and the optional protocol. The gap between government's policy and the programs in comparison with the CRPD provisions were assessed. The positive aspects on the lives of persons with disability with better implementation was deeply analyzed. The individual communication and inquiry, monitoring and reporting system under optional protocol was understood by the parliamentarians. As a procedure of central government, the Ministry of Finance intended to map the budget implications after ratification of the convention and the optional protocol. In this instant, we carried out the mapping of existing budget provision, laws, policies, and programs of the government based on CRPD principles and the executable rights provisions. The task force for mapping the budget implications comprised the Secretary of Ministry of Finance, the Secretary of Women, Children and Social Welfare, and myself. The assessment report highlighted that the budget has been allocated in local level. However, the implementation was not effective following the spirit of inclusive principles. Dialogues with the Constitutional Assembly members for sensitizing on the importance of CRPD and optional protocol for ensuring fundamental rights of persons with disabilities carried out in series in the engagement of the members of Inter-Parliamentarian Disability Caucus. The interaction of different stakeholders comprising Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, political parties, chairperson of the Parliament, Office of the Prime Minister were carried out for the ratification of Convention and the optional protocol. The parliamentarians were informed about the contents of CRPD and the gap between government's policy and program in comparison with CRPD provisions. The Speaker of the Constitutional Assembly, Right Honorable Suhas Nemang, stated that the issues of persons with disability is extended much beyond the issues of their access to health care services and education that has thus far been motivated by approaches such as sympathy and protection. He further highlighted that the adoption of CRPD was addressed as landmark step in recognizing the rights of persons with disabilities and moving towards rights-based approach as paradigm shift. Thereby, he expressed commitments to support the agenda of ratification of the Convention and the optional protocol in the Parliament. He further added that the Constitution of Nepal would get momentum with the ratification of the Convention and the Optional Protocol once Nepal became the state party. There was also continuous commitments of members of parliament from various political parties. The chairpersons of different disability organizations, human rights organizations, thematic organizations on disabilities, human rights workers, thematic organizations on disabilities, media persons urged to ratify the convention and the optional protocol. Likewise, a mass communication event organized in the forms of television documentary through national television channel. The documentary was produced accommodating the voice of DPO leaders, service providers, parents of persons with disabilities and stakeholders, urging the ratification of convention and the optional protocol. In the course of accelerating the joint advocacy initiatives of civil society representing DPOs and the members of Interparliamentarian Disability-Friendly Caucus for the ratification of the Convention and the Optional Protocol without any reservation, a shadow parliament in the name of Shadow Constitutional Assembly was organized collectively in national level. The event was joined by the representatives of DPOs across the country, enjoyed opportunities to interact with the parliamentarians and the government, internalizing the practical problems in the grassroots communities by persons with disability, both the policy implementation and discriminative social and cultural practice. It is noted that Nepal has self-executive law, and based on Article 9 of Nepal Treaty Act, CRPD and optional protocol will come into force once it is ratified by the Parliament. Nepal should be entitled to recognize the competence of Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to receive and consider communications from individuals or groups of individuals subject to its jurisdiction who claim to be victim of violation by the state following the provisions of the Convention. It could be the basis of the elaboration of national legislation. There was time bound for the submission of primary report by June 2012. The DPOs also intend to submit the alternate report to the CRPD committee. Thus, the initiatives were taken in collaboration with DPOs and the development partners. Though Nepal became the state party of the Convention and the Optional Protocol, there was grave violence of the human rights of persons with disability, both from state level, family, and the community. Following the provision of individual communication and inquiry established by optional protocol, individual first needed seeking remedy in the jurisdiction in Nepal who claim to be victim of the violation. In this instance, there are several public interest litigation filed against the government in the Supreme Court of Nepal, which can be considered as individual communication and inquiry. Human rights and fundamental freedom and sets out obligation of Nepal have been to ensure legal and practical enjoyment of rights and freedom. In continuation to the past practices, in contrast to the CRPD provisions, number of petitions filed in the Supreme Court against the government, which has dealt with these petitions with highest sensitivity and provided positive interpretation with regards to the various rights of persons with disabilities. Besides, there are several evidence that persons with disabilities have carried out the individual communication and inquiry with the Human Rights Commission (NHRC) and the local government in the concerned issues. There are some positive results with the intervention through individual communication and inquiry, such as the Constitution of Nepal is positive in guaranteeing rights of the citizen, including persons with disabilities. On 7th August 2017, the Legislature Parliament enacted the Act on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which came into force after Presidential Seal. The rule of the Act enacted in 2020. The law guarantees rights to life, equal protection of law, freedom of movement, right to free education, free medical facilities, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of torture and personal integrity, social security, employment opportunities, access to justice following CRPD provisions. The Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare has initiated the CRPD internalization within ministerial program. The Living Standard Survey of Persons with Disabilities has been carried out that provides the evidence for the Disability Inclusive Development Plan incompatible to the disability targets of Sustainable Development Goals. The government has formed the National Disability Direction Committee under the Ministry of Women, Children and Senior Citizens. The committee is functional with the mandate of monitoring the government program, provide guidelines for the planning and execution of the government program. The similar structure is in the process of forming in province and local level, which is very essential for the remedial measures for the individual communication and inquiry by the persons with disabilities. Due to lack of accessibility and sign language in the courts, prosecutor's office, police stations are beyond the reach of persons with hearing disabilities. We should be improved providing sign language interpreter to provide access to justice for persons with hearing disabilities. The Justice of Supreme Court, Honorable Sapna Malla, expressed regret over the fact that 75% of women with disability do not approach the court seeking justice due to the social stigma attached. Women seeking justice through court action are often accused of causing unrest in familial circle, leading to degeneration of familial relationship. Therefore, full realization of both the right de jure and de facto enshrined in the Convention can only be achieved through domestic effort in creating and enabling in the practice. The Human Rights Commission of Nepal may review prevailing legal provisions so as to ensure that these provisions are in line with the International Human Rights Instrument, including CRPD, and submit necessary recommendations to the government for its effective implementation. The government of Nepal is legally obligated to seek and incorporate opinion of the constitutional commissions prior to submitting reports to the treaty bodies under International Human Rights Treaty. The Disabled People's Organization should be sensitized on the rights of persons with disabilities, followed by the convention and the method of execution of individual communication inquiry. The DPOs should participate actively in coordination in national, provincial and local level mechanism that is considered as a platform for strengthening advocacy for the execution of the recommendation of CRPD committee in the form of concluding observation. The DPOs should establish the monitoring body of CRPD implementation comprising DPOs and stakeholders. The committee should be institutionalized and work for facilitating the access to justice for persons with disabilities so that they can fulfill a big role to play in bringing laws in books to laws in action. Because the issue of women with disability has yet to be reflected in the program priorities, the roles of self-help group of women with disabilities is even higher, so that the Article 6 of the Convention will be focused while implementing the individual communication and inquiry. In response to the aforementioned issues, may I cite the limitations of an optional protocol in highlighting individual issues and challenges that may be countered in the local levels in the stereotype mindset. An international human rights instrument can be taken as guiding principles that state parties are obliged to incorporate and implement them through domestic jurisprudence. Thus, mere the ratification of the convention would not be sufficient for guaranteeing and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, but additional measures for the domestication of such principles and establishment of effective means of individual communication and inquiry would be a necessity, which is the basis of paradigm shift of rights entitled by persons with disabilities through international jurisprudence from a welfare approach to the human rights based approach. Thank you for listening to me.